The sound of the auctioneer's hammer was almost drowned out by the oppressive heat of the Arizona desert. It was a scorching Tuesday afternoon in July 1887 when the moment of fate arrived. The sun beat mercilessly on Copper Ridge's Main Street as Vernon Blackwell, in his sharp suit and polished boots, eyed the young woman standing helpless before him, her hands bound tightly behind her back. 17-year-old Cordelia May was nothing but a prize in his eyes, her once proud auburn hair now matted to her tear-streaked face, the dust of the desert clinging to her skin. Standing beside her was Silas Ward, the man who had taken her in after her parents died of fever 2 years prior, only to sell her to pay off his mounting gambling debts. Ward stood counting the $300 Blackwell had already handed over, marking the price of her life in a town where money spoke louder than justice. The crowd, a mix of miners, drifters, and townsfolk, surrounded the platform, some whisper in disgust, but no one moved to stop the transaction, not with Blackwell's wealth and influence behind it. The law, it was just another tool he controlled, and Sheriff Morton was just another pawn. Cordelia, her heart racing, searched the sea of indifferent faces for a glimmer of hope. She knew no one would intervene, not with Blackwell involved. As the auctioneer raised his gavel, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Going once," he called, "for $300 to Mr. Blackwell." Cordelia closed her eyes, silently praying to a God that had long seemed deaf to her suffering. "Going twice," the auctioneer announced. But before the gavel could fall, an unsettling silence swept over the crowd. The whispers died, and every eye turned to a figure standing at the edge of the platform. He was tall, dressed in a long black coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of his worn hat. Even from behind, there was no mistaking the figure. Tobias Crow, the man they called the Silent Ghost. The crowd parted, instinctively recognizing the legendary gunfighter. Tobias hadn't spoken a word in 15 years, not since the day his life had been torn apart, but the mere sight of him was enough to freeze the blood in any man's veins. Blackwell's confident smirk faltered as the ghost's hand moved to rest casually on the ivory handle of his Colt .45. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. Silas Ward, who had been basking in his newfound wealth, now stepped forward, his voice trembling. "You've got no business here, mister," he said, his tone defensive. "This is all legal and proper." Tobias slowly lifted his head, and when his eyes met Cordelia's, something stirred within her. For the first time, she saw something more than the cold indifference the man was known for. There was compassion there, real, genuine concern. And then, to her shock, he spoke. 500. The words broke through the desert air like a sudden storm. It was the first sound anyone had heard from Tobias Crow in over a decade, and it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. The crowd gasped collectively. 500. Blackwell's face flushed with rage. He stammered, "You can't just waltz in here and—" 600, Tobias interrupted, stepping onto the platform with quiet menace. His boots echoed with every measured step as he moved closer to Blackwell. The crowd tensed, and Cordelia's heart skipped. This man, this ghost who had haunted the streets of Copper Ridge for years, was risking everything to save her. Ward's eyes lit up, greed quickly overtaking his initial shock. 700, he shouted, eager to see the price rise even higher. But Blackwell, now visibly flustered, clenched his fists. "This is an overbid. This was settled. You can't." Tobias's icy gaze turned to face him fully, and the air seemed to cool. "Nothing legal about buying people," he said, his voice low but cutting, a silent condemnation of everything Blackwell represented. The word children landed like a physical blow in the air, and the crowd shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the townsfolk saw the true nature of the deal in front of them. This wasn't just about money. It was about power and the price of a person's life. The sheriff, a man who owed his position to Blackwell, stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Now, let's keep this civilized," he stammered. "Mr. Blackwell has made a fair offer under territorial law. 700. But Tobias never even glanced at the sheriff. His eyes remained fixed on Cordelia, and she saw something there, something softer than she had ever imagined. It was hope, fleeting yet real. Ward snatched the money from Tobias's hand, stuffing it greedily into his vest. "Deal's done," he said. "The girl belongs to Mr. Blackwell now, as originally agreed." Cordelia's heart sank. She had allowed herself to hope for too long. But just as despair was about to consume her, she saw something that made her blood run cold. 6 men, armed to the teeth, emerged from the shadows, surrounding the platform. Blackwell's thugs. Funny thing about auctions, Blackwell's voice dripped with sarcasm. Sometimes the highest bidder doesn't get to collect his winnings. The armed men took their positions, guns drawn and aimed at Tobias. Sheriff Morton, taking a step back, made it clear whose side he was on. "Now, Tobias," he said, trying to sound authoritative, "these men are here to keep the peace. No need for any unpleasantness." Ward grinned, his greed evident. "The girl's mine now. Sorry, mister." Cordelia felt her world fall apart. For that fleeting moment, she thought salvation had come in the form of the silent ghost. But now, with the guns trained on him, it seemed all was lost. But Tobias Crow hadn't survived for 15 years by making careless mistakes. As he raised his hand slowly, his voice remained steady. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his tone casual, almost conversational. "Because once I start shooting, I don't stop until everyone's down." The lead gunman, a hulking brute named Jake Henley, sneered. 6 against 1, ghost. "Even you ain't that good." "Maybe not," Tobias admitted, his gaze never leaving Henley. "But I guarantee you'll be the first to die." Henley's smile faltered. The men around him shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the stories. Tobias Crow never missed. The air felt heavy with tension. Suddenly, in a move no one saw coming, Tobias stepped behind Cordelia, using her bound form as partial cover. It wasn't what anyone expected. "Sorry about this, miss," he murmured under his breath. And then, with a deadly calm, the silent ghost drew his gun. He whispered so only Cordelia could hear, "When I say now, you run for the church and don't look back." His knife, hidden beneath the folds of his coat, flashed in the sunlight, slicing through the rope that bound her hands. As she gasped, Tobias pressed a small derringer into her trembling fingers. "Whatever happens, don't let them take you." Cordelia's heart raced in her chest as she closed her fingers around the tiny weapon. "You're insane," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos of the gunfight. "Maybe," Tobias replied, his gaze cold and focused. "But insanity's kept me alive this long." The standoff felt endless, like time itself had stopped. 6 hired killers stood against 1 man, and a terrified girl, the air thick with tension. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat dripping from nervous fingers on both sides. No one was ready for what happened next. The first chime of the church bell shattered the quiet like a gunshot. In that instant, Tobias moved, his hand drawing his Colt .45 faster than anyone could track. The gun roared to life, and before Blackwell's men could react, Jake Henley spun backward, clutching his shoulder, his own weapon spinning out his hand. "Now!" Tobias shouted. Cordelia, heart hammering in her chest, bolted. The derringer was clutched tightly in her shaking hands as she sprinted toward the white church steeple rising in the distance. The chaos behind her was deafening, a cacophony of gunfire and shouting. Tobias, moving with the precision of a predator, dove behind a water trough, rolling as bullets slammed into wood around him. His second shot took down another man before he could duck for cover. His third left a hired killer diving for the safety of a barrel, cursing as splinters flew into his face. But Blackwell wasn't finished yet. Cordelia could hear him, his voice bellowing over the sound of the gunfire. "Stop her. The girl's mine." 2 more men appeared from an alley next to the church, cutting off her escape. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized them. The Morrison brothers, notorious in 4 territories for their unspeakable deeds. Well, the older brother sneered. "Looks like our pretty little bird flew right to us." Cordelia's hand shook as she raised the derringer, the small barrel pointing at the 2 men. "Stay back, I'll shoot," she warned, her voice wavering. The brothers only laughed. But they stopped advancing, their eyes narrowing. They could see it in her, a desperation that made her dangerous. Behind them, the gunfight continued to rage. Tobias had taken out another man, but he was running out of cover, and blood seeped from a graze on his arm. The Morrison brothers moved closer, their smiles widening. "You think that little pop gun scares us?" the younger brother taunted. "Even if you hit one of us, the other will get you. So what's it going to be, sweetheart? You're going to run into the church and pray those doors hold? Or are you going to stand your ground and fight with a weapon you've never fired?" Cordelia's finger tightened on the trigger. But before she could make a choice, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Boys, I'd step away from the lady if I were you." Everyone turned to see a figure stepping out from the shadows of the church. Father Miguel, the old Mexican priest who'd served Copper Ridge for 20 years. But this man wasn't the gentle shepherd they knew. No, this man held 2 cult peacemakers in his hands, and the stance of someone who'd seen plenty of bloodshed before he found religion. "Padre," the older Morrison brother gasped. Father Miguel's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Used to be Captain Miguel Santana, Confederate cavalry. Before I found Jesus, I found quite a few men who needed killing." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The priest, who'd baptized their children and blessed their marriages, had once been a soldier, a man of war, not peace. The crowd seemed frozen, stunned by the turn of events. But Blackwell, far from intimidated, was reaching for something that would change everything. With trembling hands, Blackwell pulled out a stick of dynamite. The entire street fell deathly silent. Even the gunfire stopped as everyone watched the red cylinder in Blackwell's hand, the fuse already lit by the cigar dangling precariously from his lips. Everybody freeze. Blackwell screamed, his voice trembling with desperation and rage. "I'll blow this whole street to hell before I let that girl slip away." Father Miguel's hands remained steady, his gun still trained on the Morrison brothers. "Vernon, you've lost your mind," he said calmly. "There are innocent people here." Blackwell laughed, his face twisted with madness. "There ain't been innocent people in this town for years. You're all thieves, murderers, and hypocrites." Tobias emerged from behind the water trough, blood dripping from his arm, but his aim remained steady. "Put it down, Blackwell. This ain't worth dying over." Blackwell's eyes went wild. "Worth dying over?" he sneered. "I've invested everything in this operation. You think one washed-up gunfighter can destroy my empire?" That's when Cordelia realized a horrible truth. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. She was just the latest in a long line of girls Blackwell had bought and shipped to his brothel in California. She was nothing more than a commodity in a business built on human suffering. The rage that surged through her was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. She stepped forward, despite Father Miguel's warning gesture. "You're a monster," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "How many girls have you destroyed?" Blackwell's cigar came closer to the fuse. "Dozens. And there'll be dozens more after you're gone." The Morrison brothers began to back away. They had worked with Blackwell before, but this was different. Even hired killers had their limits, and being blown up wasn't part of their contract. Tobias took another step forward. "Let her go, Vernon. Take your money and leave town. Disappear, and maybe you live to see another sunrise." Blackwell sneered. "What happened to the man who never spoke? What made you break 15 years of silence for some worthless orphan girl?" The question hung in the air, unanswered for a long, heavy moment. Tobias's eyes locked onto Cordelia's across the street, and for the first time, he realized why he had risked it all. "She reminds me of my daughter," he said quietly. The words hit everyone like a physical blow. The silent ghost had a daughter? Blackwell's laughter turned ugly. "Your daughter? The one who died in that fire you couldn't prevent? The one who screams." Tobias's roar of rage shook the very earth beneath them. But before he could raise his gun, an unthinkable thing happened. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is about to reveal a secret that's been buried for 15 years. Cordelia shot first. The crack of the Derringer was sharp and sudden, cutting through Blackwell's taunting laughter. The bullet hit his wrist, sending the dynamite and cigar flying in opposite directions. Time seemed to slow as the lit cigar spiraled through the air, trailing smoke like a falling star. The dynamite tumbled end over end toward the wooden sidewalk, where it would have obliterated half the street. But Father Miguel, with lightning-fast reflexes, dove forward, catching the dynamite barehanded just as the cigar landed and rolled harmlessly into the dust. He saved a dozen lives in that split second. Blackwell screamed, clutching his bleeding wrist, the blood pouring between his fingers. "You little witch, you shot me." "Should have aimed higher," Cordelia said, her voice colder than she expected. Tobias stared at her in stunned silence. This girl, this terrified orphan, had made the most important shot of the entire fight. Not the trained killer, not the former cavalry officer turned priest, but the girl who'd never held a gun before today. The remaining gunmen, now realizing they were outmatched, dropped their weapons. With Blackwell wounded and the dynamite threat neutralized, they lost their will to fight. Sheriff Morton, who'd stayed hidden during the chaos, found his courage now that the danger had passed. "Now, see here. There's been enough violence for one day." "Shut up, Morton," Tobias growled, his attention focused entirely on Blackwell. "You want to know why I broke my silence? You want to know about my daughter?" Blackwell whimpered, still clutching his bleeding wrist. "Her name was Emma," Tobias said, his voice ringing clear across the street. "She was 17, just like Miss Cordelia here." The crowd, which had been hiding in fear, began to emerge. The legend of the Silent Ghost was no longer just a story. It was unfolding before their very eyes. 15 years ago, Tobias continued, his voice full of grief, men like you burned down our house, trying to take her. She died in that fire while I was away on a job. The crowd, stunned and silent, witnessed a moment of revelation that would haunt Copper Ridge forever. The weight of Tobias's words hung heavy in the air. His gray eyes locked onto Blackwell with the intensity of a hawk on the hunt. Funny thing about patient man Vernon, we always find what we're looking for. Blackwell's face drained of color as the realization struck him like a blow. You can't be serious. That was 15 years ago," he stammered. "I was just the middleman." Tobias's gun remained steady, his voice cold. "You helped plan it. You've been running the same operation ever since, destroying lives like my Emma's." Cordelia felt the sting of Tobias's words, but she also sensed something stirring in him. Something she hadn't seen before, a fierce pride. He had found his voice again, and he wasn't about to let the man who had helped ruin his life walk away unscathed. Father Miguel moved closer, his hand still holding the dynamite carefully, as if it were the most delicate thing in the world. "Tobias, justice and revenge are not the same thing. Don't let her death turn you into something Emma would never recognize." The street was still, the tension palpable. Tobias stood at a crossroads, vengeance in his heart, but mercy still within his reach. But before he could make his decision, Silas Ward made a rash move that would change everything. Ward, in a last-ditch effort to secure his own survival, yanked Cordelia back, pressing a knife against her throat. "Nobody move," he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "I've got legal rights to this girl. Blackwell paid me fair and square." Cordelia's heart pounded as the cold steel of the blade rested against her skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself for the worst. She thought it was all going to end with her throat cut by the very man who was supposed to protect her. Tobias's expression remained icy, his gaze never leaving Ward. "Let her go. Your quarrel is with me, not with her." Ward's grip on the knife tightened, his voice trembling. "You think I want to sell her? I got debts. There are people who'll kill me if I don't pay them." Father Miguel, calm and collected, set the dynamite down and raised his hands, attempting to de-escalate. "Silas, there's another way. The church's funds." Ward scoffed, shaking his head. "The church won't save me from Morrison's cousins. They want blood or gold, and I'm fresh out of both." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Tobias's mind. Ward wasn't just greedy. He was trapped in a vicious cycle of debt to some of the most dangerous men in the territory. Selling Cordelia was the only way to buy his life back, but Tobias knew that didn't make it right. "How much do you owe them?" Tobias asked quietly. Ward's knife wavered slightly. $1,200. "But what's it matter to you?" Tobias reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch filled with gold coins. "Here's 1,500, more than enough to clear your debts and get you out of here." The crowd gasped, shocked by the sum. It was more money than most of them would ever see in a lifetime. Ward stared at the gold, his eyes wide with greed, but the knife stayed at Cordelia's throat. "How do I know you won't shoot me the moment I let her go?" Ward sneered, his voice laced with fear. "Because," Tobias said, his voice steady and unshakable, "my daughter will want to give you a chance to walk away." Father Miguel added softly, "Take the gold, Silas. Walk away from this life. The church can help you find a new path, a chance to become the man you were meant to be." For a brief moment, it seemed like Ward might relent. His grip on the knife loosened, and Cordelia dared to hope. But just as quickly, Blackwell's cruel laugh shattered the fragile peace. "Go ahead, Ward," Blackwell sneered, wounded but still full of malice. "Take his money. But know this, I've got friends in every territory, from here to California. They'll find you, and when they do—" Ward's face twisted in renewed fear and desperation. The knife pressed harder against Cordelia's throat. "You're right," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's nowhere to run." That's when Cordelia made the decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting to be saved, she took matters into her own hands. Recalling a technique her father had taught her years ago, she grabbed Ward's wrist with both hands and dropped her full weight downward. The sudden movement threw him off balance, and the knife sliced harmlessly through the air. Before Ward could recover, Tobias's shot rang out. The bullet struck Ward in the shoulder, spinning him away from Cordelia. The knife clattered uselessly to ground as Ward collapsed, clutching his bleeding shoulder and sobbing. Blackwell, stunned and defeated, sank to the ground, his empire crumbling around him. The remaining gunmen, sensing the end was near, mounted their horses, eager to escape before the law arrived from the territorial capital. Father Miguel picked up Ward's discarded knife and tossed it aside. "Sheriff Morton," he called, his voice calm but firm, "I believe you have some arrests to make." The sheriff, now faced with no choice, nervously surveyed the scene. With Blackwell's power shattered and the whole town watching, he had no excuse left but to do his job. "Vernon Blackwell, Silas Ward," Sheriff Morton said, his voice wavering. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and human trafficking." As the dust settled on Copper Ridge's main street, Cordelia found herself face to face with a man who had risked everything to save her. Tobias Crow, no longer the silent ghost, but a man who had found his voice again. He had chosen courage over revenge, and in doing so had saved her life. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice full of emotion. Tobias holstered his gun and tipped his hat. "No need for thanks, miss. You saved yourself when it mattered most." Cordelia, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and respect, asked, "What will you do now?" Tobias looked around at the town, still adjusting to the newfound freedom it had gained. "Reckon I'll stick around for a while. Copper Ridge could use someone to keep an eye on things. Make sure what happened here today doesn't happen again." Father Miguel approached them both, a kind smile creasing his weathered face. "Cordelia, the church always has room for someone willing to help with the orphanage." He turned to Tobias. "And Tobias, perhaps it's time you consider that some sins can be forgiven and some silences are meant to be broken." As the sun began to set over Copper Ridge, casting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cordelia felt something stirring inside her that had long been absent. Hope. Hope for the future. The girl who had been sold like cattle that morning had found her strength in the face of death. The silent gunfighter had found his voice in the name of justice, and a corrupt town had learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Tobias glanced down at Cordelia, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Your parents would be proud of you, miss. You've got more courage than men twice your size." Cordelia, her heart swelling with pride, smiled back. "My father always said courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified." Smart man, Tobias nodded. Reckon he raised quite a daughter. Together, they walked toward the church. Tobias, the former silent ghost. Cordelia, the orphan girl who had found her courage. And Father Miguel, the priest who had shown that sometimes salvation came in the form of a man who carried both scripture and guns. As they left the chaos of the street behind, the people of Copper Ridge knew they had witnessed something legendary, something that would be passed down for generations. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a man who finally breaks his silence. Sometimes it comes from a girl who refuses to be broken. And sometimes it comes from the courage to speak up when it matters most. Tobias had found his voice. Cordelia had found her freedom. And Copper Ridge had found its soul.